I'm Emily Giubertoni. I'm the director of Bishop Challoner Skit, and this podcast is about reading, and reading particularly in secondary subjects that aren't English. And nationally at the moment, I think teachers are all very aware of, I'm going to call it a literacy crisis, but certainly COVID had an effect, and that just students reading less is an ongoing and perennial concern for teachers, that students in secondary schools having the literacy level to access GCSEs, access qualifications, to access high quality reading is a real concern. It's something that we need to be working on in every subject, and I think all teachers hopefully are in agreement today that literacy is not just the English teacher's responsibility. Literacy is the responsibility of every teacher. And one of the frameworks that we think about for how we approach that should be subject-specific reading. These are not generic strategies that we're trying to teach students, but we're trying to teach students how to read in your subject. So what does it mean to read like a scientist? What does it mean to read like a historian? What does it mean to read like an artist? And we might think about, what are the types of texts that people in these fields actually are reading, and how do they read them? What's the purpose that they're reading for? And that will factor into the kinds of things that we choose to give our students to read in the subject, and in the way that we scaffold them as well, so that we're talking to our students about, okay, we're going to do this bit of reading, we're going to read this kind of extract, but we're going to read it like chemists would read. We're, in that example, we're looking for factual information. We're looking for the kind of scientific knowledge that we can pull out. And that's a very different conversation to the conversation that an English teacher reading a piece of creative, imaginative work might have with the student. The other thing that we might think about when we're choosing reading texts for our classes is that cultural literacy opportunity. And it's just really powerful to think that students have read the best of what has been written in our subject, in our field. And this isn't just have they read some Shakespeare in their English lesson, but if you're a scientist, have the students that you're teaching had an opportunity to read some things by some of the great thinkers in your subject and the great scientists, or about those figures, broadening their cultural literacy and learning more about the world. And I think there's a really nice framework for doing this if you just think about having one really great text a term. If students read one really great text that's really developing their cultural literacy each term from year 7 to the end of year 11, those students will come out at the other end having read 15 really high quality pieces of research. And if we then think about students, high quality pieces of reading, if we then think about students going on to careers and into the academic field, going into A-level and their degree, the ability for a student who's studying sixth form science, for example, to say, I've read something by Primo Levi, or a student in geography to say, I've read something about the great explorations that have happened in these geographical regions of the world, or a student in French to say, well, I've read something in translation by Voltaire, or a great poet in French. And it might be actually in the original French as well, which would be even more impressive. But I think what I'm talking about here is learning to read in English. And that cultural literacy is a huge gift we can give our students. Underpinning that, what we're talking about in this podcast, are some of the strategies you can put in place to support that. So the first thing you need to do is choose a really good reading. You find your really good reading, and you're thinking you're not looking to read the entire thing. If you want them to read an extract of Darwin, you're not looking for them to read a whole chapter or the whole of The Origin of the Species. Literally breaking that down so you've got a bit of text, an extract of text that is maybe a side of A4 normal spaced, double spacing it for the students, maybe it's 2 sides of A4. And then how are we going to scaffold that? And I think there's 3 phases you've got to think about. So first, you've got your text. Before students get anywhere near it, you have some pre-reading questions that you discuss with the class. And what you might be doing there is picking out some of the cultural literacy that they need to know that will help them make sense of it. There's a really excellent book, voted one of the greatest science books ever written, The Periodic Table by Primo Levi. An extract from that, which is about his experiences in Auschwitz. before I was reading that with the students, you're going to have to make sure that students understand the context of the Holocaust and Auschwitz and what it means that Primo Levi was a chemist who was in Auschwitz, what it means that he was Italian, that he was Jewish, and that he was incarcerated there. That doesn't need to be a long conversation, but it is a conversation, a bit of dialogue to have in the lesson, maybe just a couple of minutes of thinking what in this text might be a bit baffling to the students, if they need, and what can we have a quick conversation with now that will help them access it and read it and have a really good understanding of it. The next phase you want to think about is how do you support the students while they're reading it. And my personal favourite strategy here is to go through that text and write questions down the side of it on the worksheet that line up roughly with where the answers are. And those questions are really powerfully written to help students work out what's going on. So implicitly, the question is kind of drawing their attention to, this is the main point in this paragraph. You need to get this answer. And you just scaffold it by putting it next to the paragraph that the answer's in to help students do that. And that is something that requires a little bit of pre-thought, but once it's done, that's a resource you can share around your whole department. That's a resource you can share very easily with the students. It's easy, very easy to differentiate as well by thinking about what different questions can you ask and how do you use the language of those questions. And you could be putting sentences in bold as well, just to really foreground them for students, if that would be an extra helpful thing to do. And finally, you might think about supporting their vocabulary during that, thinking about Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary. So thinking about your subject-specific vocabulary. Got a great extract from Pompeii by Robert Harris. It's a really great recreation in that book. It's supposed to be very historically accurate of the eruption of Vesuvius. There are some real subject-specific words in there, like, you know, that kind of talking about pumice and pyroclastic flows and things. I would want to check that students understood those words so that they don't get to that word and instantly have a, I can't do that, I'm stuck. That's the clarification of the subject-specific words. After reading, I'd also want to pull out some of those words that can help them in all subjects, those kind of like wow words that you think, yeah, that would be a really amazing word to see in any student's kind of academic writing. Not the language we use every day with our friends, but that kind of just higher level vocabulary. And almost every reading will have one or two of those words in it that you can pick out. And you just want to be highlighting those for the students as well. Maybe giving them a really quick task, like, this was a great word in this extract. Let's say, can you write me an example of that in a sentence from another subject? Can you be rewarding students if they use those words? The very last step will be to think about how do you assess that kind of student understanding in a really sensible way. You don't want them to come back to the lesson and you just, you know, let's get your worksheets out, and half the students have forgotten their worksheets, and then you're getting your pens out and they're marking each other's and some of them aren't quite focused and all of this. A much better way of doing this is have some multiple choice questions that you've designed and putting them on the board as a starter when they come back, either after if they've done it in lessons at the end of the reading task, or if they did it for homework at the start of the next lesson. And just some multiple choice questions, finger voting from the students. Some of those could be factual answers. You know, literally like, what time of day was it in the extract when Vesuvius erupted? Some of them might be more where they've had to read into it, they've had to really think about it, really testing that kind of deeper inference skills. But either way, multiple choice question on the board, finger voting, assessment of the class, and then asking certain students, cold calling them, can you explain your answer? Do you agree? Can you add or challenge? Having that really nice feedback. To support this kind of thing, if you go to the link on the screen here, the Text for Teachers tiny URL, that will take you to a Google Drive that is having in it some PDFs of lots of different readings for different subjects. Please do download or use those. If you'd like Word documents, drop us an email, get in contact. And there's also a TikTok which is sharing when I put new ones in that document. So if you have a look at the TikTok Text for Teachers, you would be able to see a video will go up every time there's a new one added to that Google Drive, and those are really available if you want to use them and use them for your own teaching, adapted in any way, hopefully, just to make this process a bit easier. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of our BCTSA podcast.